Hey, good morning, church family. My name is James. I oversee outreach here at Calvary, but today I get the opportunity of just helping us dive into the Word. And I love getting the opportunity to do this. And, my heart is that when we leave here, we would feel like we understand the Bible a little bit better. We'd understand God, and we'd be equipped to be able to take a next step. But so we're gonna just dive in, but kind of like ball on a tee, easiest crowd participation ever. Who likes ice cream? Right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. If you didn't raise your hand, you might be lactose intolerant. I promise I'll have something for you in a second. But ice cream, I think, is the greatest dessert of all time. It's unparalleled. It's perfect. You can throw whatever you want into it. You can do brownie swirl, all the fudge things, whatever. But ice cream at its core is the greatest dessert of all time. Maybe a close second place is a hot brownie, like fresh out of the oven, right? But if you combine the two of those things, game over. It's not even a competition anymore. But let me take you back to a place called 2005, right? So this is when frozen yogurt came on the scene. I don't know if you guys remember this, but everyone for like a couple years thought frozen yogurt was the greatest thing ever. They're like, it's not ice cream, it's healthier for you, right? And so we had like 1,000 of these frozen yogurt places all popped up. I grew up here in Bellevue. Next to my house, there was a red berry. In Shadow Lake, there was an orange leaf. I looked up a couple names of them. All of them were just a color and then like a random object. And I don't know why that was the thing, but it was like, I wrote some of them down. They were red mango, peach wave, red berry, orange leaf, golden spoon, and then apparently a rogue one of just Frosty Boy. I don't know how that got in there, but I'm pretty sure Wendy's maybe had something to say about it because they're not even a company anymore. But it's just kind of funny that was like, everyone's like thought that was the greatest thing for a while, and now they don't exist. And then we went back to ice cream, and we're like, ice cream is actually the best. We won't be swayed again by anything horrible. I didn't even include Dippin' Dots, right? I'm not even throwing that in there. But then frozen yogurt was gone. And now if you go to the grocery store, if you go into the ice cream aisle, you can find anything but actual ice cream in the ice cream aisle, right? And so I remember I felt like shortly after the whole craze of Froyo, then all of a sudden we had like Halo Top ice cream. And I don't know if you've seen Halo Top on the side of the carton. They're like, this whole pint is 170 calories. And I remember people were like, you can eat the whole thing and it's only 170 calories. And so I tried it, and the hard thing is that it actually tastes like it's regular ice cream that was melted, and then you tried to put it back in the freezer. You know how like it doesn't freeze right the second time? And then it got freezer burnt. That's the whole pint. That's what the whole thing tastes like. And everyone's like, but it's only 170 calories. You can pay me to eat that, right? And so then it's like we have all this stuff that's still not ice cream, and it's like not nearly as good. And even here in Omaha, there's an ice cream shop called Coneflower. And I don't know if you've been there. According to Yelp, they announced this year based on reviews and all these things. They did this whole thing. They said that Coneflower in Omaha is the best ice cream shop in America. That's crazy, right? We have the best ice cream in America. You have the opportunity to have the best ice cream possible, and people are choosing to eat frozen, like the freezer burnt Halo Top, right? And so again, if you're lactose intolerant, I'll give you just get a blanket pass on this whole section of my sermon today, right? So you just kind of get a pass. But if you follow that story of just how new things kind of come and go, and we kind of have all these fads, but eventually people come back to like, hey, actually the original of just like creamed ice cream, right? Just like frozen cream, that is the best. If you understand that, then you understand the whole Old Testament story. Right? So you have this thing where God has chosen this people, right? This is the original ice cream, right? This is God's relationship. Genesis 1, first page of the Bible, you see what it looks like to be in community with God. And then at the very opportunity for them to run to something else, they do. And then you see all this destruction happen, and then people are saying like, I'm actually gonna go back, I'm gonna return to God, and because I realize that the mistake I've made, and we're gonna go back to the thing that's actually better. And so they do that for a little bit, and then as soon as something else pops up, they run away again. And you see this throughout the whole Old Testament of going back to God saying, I'm sorry, I realize that you are better, your way is better, and I'm broken. And then as soon as something else presents itself, they're like, maybe we should go try that other thing just to see if it's better. And it never is. And so in the New Testament, you see God put on flesh in the life of Jesus, and he comes and he's like, I'm gonna take this into my own hands, and I'm gonna prove to them what it looks like to be perfect and to live in community with God and each other. And so he does that in the life of Jesus, but not only that, he comes and fulfills all the prophecies that have been written about him 1,000 years before. In Isaiah 53, all of this gets summed up, right? So Jesus is not even on the scene, and this is what it says about Jesus as it foreshadows his coming. It says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we were healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is the greatest thing that's ever happened in this world, but the Hebrew people wanted something different. They wanted someone to come and lead a nation, and in the Old Testament, we see that they wanted a king. They wanted a president to come and rightly restore themselves. They wanted to be able to put themselves back on top, and then even now, the author is trying to get them to understand, like, hey, Jesus came. We had been looking and waiting for someone to come to reunite us, and they did that, and so now let's not miss it. So the author is writing to the Hebrews, these people who had grown up searching and waiting, and he's telling them, like, now don't miss it, because the greatest just came and we murdered him. And so we need to turn our eyes back, and we need to fix our eyes on the one who is better. And so we've been diving into the book of Hebrews these last 3 weeks, kind of talking about this and how people should just put their faith in Jesus and stop looking for the next best thing to come along. And last week, Ryan talked about anchoring our hope in the life of Jesus. And so that's where we're going to start, right? Because we're going to see this progression today of how the author of Hebrews talks about your faith journey. And last week, Ryan talked about anchoring your hope in you're anchoring your hope in the life of Jesus, and that's truly where it starts. It's hope. And so hope is the beginning of faith. This is the first progression that we're going to see, is that your faith journey starts with hope in Jesus. And so what does it mean to have faith? I feel like I've heard a lot of people talk about faith in ways that the Bible doesn't talk about faith, which is not super helpful. But maybe you've heard someone say, like, if someone's wrestling or going through doubts or just questions about the Bible, and maybe someone just comes back with, well, you just need to have faith. That's not really what the Bible's trying to get at. I often heard from multiple people, if someone had walked away from the faith or was questioning it, they're like, they're just too smart for their own good. They just need to have faith. Right? And that's not how we see the Bible talk about. So we're going to talk about 4 things quick that faith is not. And the first one is this: it's not positive thinking. It's not just trying to make just like, well, if I just think good things, it's just going to happen. It's going to work. Sometimes, like after a sporting event, they're interviewing a player, and they're like, we just had faith in each other. And it's like, yeah, cool. But you don't think the other team, like, they didn't have faith in their teammates? Like, of course they did. Right? That's not really what faith is. Faith is not hopeful thinking. It's not trying to send out good vibes into the universe, or rely on the stars to try to. It's not putting our faith and our hope in things that aren't real. Right? It's not just hopeful thinking. Faith is not something you inherit. Maybe this seems obvious to you. I feel like when growing up, I knew some people that they're like, well, my wife's a follower of Jesus, and she takes our kids to church and stuff, and so I'm good. It's kind of like a blanket statement of like, because my family is like pretty engaged, then I can just kind of coast and we're good too. I actually knew someone, he used to be on staff here. He was a pastor, right? His dad truly thought that he was going to be able to, he would be in heaven and would have a life with Jesus after he dies, because his son is a follower of Jesus, because his son's a pastor, right? Like that's really good. And that's just like a huge disconnect. And lastly, faith is not dependent on a sign that we ask or demand of God. I'm sure we've all done these things. I remember as a kid, I asked God, I didn't really study for a test. I was like, God, if you help me ace this test, I will never sin again, right? As a third grade kid. I did pass the test, but believe it or not, I did sin again in my life. But it's really funny, because when you say things like that, right, we give God ultimatums of like, I will put my faith in you if you do this. And it's kind of funny, because when we make those ultimatums, we get to set the terms on both sides, right? And then when we feel like God doesn't actually show up, then we're like, I guess God just doesn't care about me, right? But that's not what faith is. So let's see what the Hebrews author talks about faith. And I feel like this is one of like the legendary lines in the Bible when it comes to defining what faith is. And you can find it in Hebrews chapter 11. It's at the very beginning, and it says this: now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended about. And he's going to go on to talk about all these people that are legendary. In Hebrews chapter 11, it's called the Hall of Faith. But he says faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is living with confidence that God is going to do what he promised to do. Faith is living in confidence that God is going to do what he promised to do, and that God is going to keep his promises. And we're going to live every day like God is already in the process of fulfilling those promises because he is. And I'm going to open my Bible and just read a couple statements. We're not going to read all of chapter 11. I would encourage you, maybe in your small group this week or something, to read chapter 11 together. There is 16 different times in chapter 11 that the author starts sentences it was by faith. And I'm going to read all of them here to you. It says, it was by faith that Abel brought a more accepting offering to God. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac. It was by faith that Isaac promised blessings to his sons. It was by faith that Jacob, when he was old, blessed his sons. And it was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, confidently said that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. It was by faith that Moses' parents hid him. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh. And it was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, leading them out of slavery. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho. And it was by faith that Rahab, the prostitute, was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God. The Bible talks so much about the faith of these stories, and these are just legendary stories from the Bible. But in the middle of that, in Hebrews, in verse 13, this is what the author says. It says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. Saw them and welcomed them from a distance. They knew what God was doing. They knew how he was working in the world, and they never got to see them fulfilled, but they did it anyway. They lived their whole life trusting and doing this. And I think it's really powerful that the author kind of lays this out, because this, right, the book of the Bible is called Hebrews, writing to the Hebrew people. They get it. They've been around for a long time. They experienced all these stories in an oral tradition, right? A lot of them are written down, but they're sharing and passing these stories. The author didn't write all these stories down because they didn't know them, but he's writing them down because they did. And they needed to be reminded about what is going on. They need to be reminded about the faith of the people around them. So when they experience persecution, when they experience trials and frustration and difficulties in their life, they can remember what's going on. The people in chapter 11, when they lived their entire life, they never saw God's promises fulfilled in their lifetime, but they did it anyway. We should hear the stories about faith of people in the Bible. We should hear the stories of faith of the people that come, that are a part of our church family, and it should encourage us to take steps closer to Jesus. There's a couple families that I know here at Calvary have walked through really difficult, like cancer diagnoses or illnesses and different things like that. And hearing about how they walked with faith through those seasons, how they continued to show people that had no idea, like their relationship with Jesus weren't really into that, and they saw their hope and faith in Jesus, and it caused them to turn to God. That's incredible. And we should hear those stories of people in our own faith community of how they've walked through really difficult times, and we should be encouraged by those things too. Faith should give perspective. Faith gives perspective. That's the second part of this. So if hope begins our faith, then having faith and hearing stories about faith should shape our perspective about the world. And so we're gonna see how the author kind of gets into this, but when you're in the thick of a trial, when you're in the thick of things that are difficult in your life, whether it's on the verge of divorce or through different financial crises, or feeling like you're doing well financially and then something happens and now you really got to live by faith, right? When we start to do all these things, when we experience anxiety and depression, or we feel like there's like friction within family relationships, with all the different things, we can begin to lose our perspective, and we need to be reminded of that perspective. We need to be reminded of the stories. And it can feel overwhelming, and when we are overwhelmed, that's when we lose perspective, and that's when we choose to disengage and walk away from God and blame him. You know, there's like horses that use horse blinders so they don't get distracted. I swear if someone invents horse blinders or just dog blinders for my dog, oh my gosh, my life will change. Our dog, she's a golden doodle, golden doodle. Her name is Lola. She's great. If you come over to the house, the first 35 seconds, maybe a minute, she's gonna go buck wild. She's crazy. And then she calms down, lays down, and is super sweet the whole time. Our neighbors, when we moved into the house, they had a big golden retriever. They don't have a fence. We didn't have a fence in the front area. And so we would let our dogs out and they just play together. Lola's not gonna run away. She's got too much FOMO. She's got fear of missing out. She's not going too far. And so we can let her out and she'll play with the dogs and not go anywhere. I don't even have to be outside. I don't have to think about it. But if she sees a squirrel or a rabbit, instantly she's like, I am a wolf in Yellowstone National Park and this is my territory. And she's just gone, right? And so this was a couple weeks ago. It just felt like we had a morning, right? I wake up in the morning and you just hear, it's like, should be absolutely quiet in the house. It's raining. And all of a sudden you hear a drip inside and you're like, that's not a good sound, right? So I'm walking around the house quietly trying to find this drip and it's in our bathroom and it's coming from a light. Not ideal. And then I turn to like go back out the door and I'm looking at the door and like the paint is kind of bubbling a little bit. And it's just like, awesome. This is 6 a.m. I'm already feeling great. And so I'm, trying to call people. I called the company that redid our roof a few years ago when we had our tree fall on it. Perfect. And so I call them and they're like, yeah, we'll try to get someone to come out. The earliest schedule opening that we have is in December. And I was like, I love this. This is all good news, right? And so then I come to the office for a staff meeting, and my wife calls me and she goes, hey, I had gotten out the ladder that morning, gone up just to like try to see, maybe clear some stuff. I knew it wouldn't help, but I'm trying anything, right? I left the gate open, Lola's gone. And I was like, Naomi, it's fine. She'll be back in like 60 seconds. She's like, well, you're not gonna come home? I'm like, well, it's like 15-minute drive. By the time I get there, I'm sure Lola will be back. Lola was back in like 5 minutes, right? Of course, she's covered in like in dirt and all that stuff, and it's mud, and it's fun dog things, right? But dogs and it's so quick and easy for them to just get off track, and they're just like they can be the best animal in the world, and then seconds later, if they see like chicken on the counter or something like that, they just become a whole different thing, and it's like they can't shake it. And that's how we can be as people when we lose perspective in our lives. We can come to church every week. We can participate in a small group. We can be engaged with people around us. We can read our Bible. But then as soon as something difficult happens in our lives, it becomes really, really difficult to stay focused. I don't know who it was. One, I think might have been Mike Tyson, or it was a professional boxer. It's like everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? It's like it's easy to talk about, well, I would have did this, I should have done this, but it's like as soon as rubber meets the road, that's when it becomes real in our lives. But if we live in a life of a healthy perspective, it should grow our ability to have resistance. And this is where the author begins kind of showing what it looks like to live deeper in your faith. Perspective should grow your resistance. So in Hebrews chapter 12, right after that Hall of Faith section, he says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangled. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. If we have a healthy perspective, it should build our resistance to sin in our lives. If we're reminded daily and we're living in the perspective of what God has done and what Jesus has done, and that being in communion with Jesus, there's nothing greater than that, it should grow our ability to resist sin in our lives. We should start to see change in our life from those things. Generally in your small group, as you become vulnerable and share the things that you're struggling with, that will actually help other people become more vulnerable, and they will feel like they can overcome things. They should hear the stories of how you've overcome sin in difficult times in your life, and that should help them. And together, you guys should be like iron sharpening iron, and you should become stronger and closer to Jesus as a result of it. The Bible actually uses that exact phrase. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And the only thing that can sharpen iron is iron or even a stronger metal. A lot of us, I think we've been around people in our lives that they're draining, right? Sometimes we call them extra grace required, right? It's like you're around them, the world's always burning, everything's horrible, their lives, oh, because I would have done this, but because of this. And before you know it, if you're around them too long, it can be really easy to start complaining about things too. Even things that you didn't think were a big deal, you start complaining about it, and it shifts your whole perspective. This is the far end of the spectrum. The other side of that is you can be around people that, man, they are life-giving. They're joyful, they're filled with peace, they're compassionate, they're gracious. And when you're around them and after leaving with them, you're like, that was awesome. Like you feel better as a person around them. This is what it looks like to be able to have resistance and living in a perspective. A healthy perspective should build our resistance, and as Christians, we shouldn't see the world as it currently is, because that's how the world looks at it. We should look at the world with the way that God says it's going to be, and believe in his promises that God's already in the process of making it happen, and he's inviting us to play a role in it. We don't see the world how it is, we see how it's going to be, and we act like it's already in the process of doing that. And so the last piece of faith is this, it's that resistance builds endurance. Resistance builds endurance. Hebrews chapter 12 says, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Another translation says the author and perfecter of our faith. We have to fix our eyes on Jesus. That is the last portion of this. And that's how we build endurance, is by fixing our eyes on Jesus. So what does it look like to fix your eyes onto something? This past year, I had a goal. I wanted to run like my first ultra marathon. I did it. It sucked, but I did it, and I felt really good about it. And through the training process, there's a lot of things that you need to do. One of them is you have to eat better, which, to be honest, for me, that is difficult. I started this whole thing talking about ice cream, guys. All right, that is not an easy thing. You also have to be disciplined. You have to show up and exercise when you don't want to. And with having two little kids, it's either early in the morning, over my lunch break, or late at night. None of those options seem fun, right? And then the last thing that I noticed, and I didn't even think about it until I was preparing for this, when I thought about the biggest thing that helped me get through it was fixing my eyes on people who had already done ultra marathons. On YouTube, you can watch, there's some professional athletes that they do this types of stuff, and they actually have film crews that make real documentaries about them training for it, going through the process. It's super fascinating. But my favorite one that I've ever seen, it's called How to Run 100 Miles. And it's by a company called REI. I don't know if you heard it. It stands for Recreational Equipment Incorporated. It's the greatest store of all time. We just got one in Omaha about last year. It's at the outlet malls. It's called REI. You got to go there. It's just an outdoor store. They do bikes, cycling, all this stuff. I could do a whole pitch, but I'm not getting paid for it, so I won't. But it's awesome. Right? And so this company put it on, and it follows these two normal dudes. They're friends in college, and they want to set a goal of running a race of 100 miles together. These people are not runners. They're not, and I think that's why I enjoy it, is because I was like, I'm a normal dude. I didn't do track or cross country in high school or college. I'm not that guy. I'm just a normal dude, and I wanted to try to do something really difficult. And so they follow these two guys, and it shows like at the beginning they're doing these workouts and stuff, and it's really, really difficult. They're not running super far, and they're winded, but over time, through their consistency, they're able to do it. And I love watching videos like that because motivation is fleeting, and I need to be reminded of a healthy perspective and people who have done it, and so I can tell myself, oh, I can do it too. Right? So I watch these videos, and sometimes I watch them while I was running, like on the treadmill if it's like rainy. Sometimes I think about them a lot. I like to listen to podcasts of people who are going through it. And it helps you keep your eyes fixed on the goal so that when you're in the thick of it and you're really thinking like, I don't measure up and I can't do this, you have something to point you towards your ability to actually continue to go on. So we're going to put all this together because I know there's lots of like the progression of your faith journey can be pretty hard to understand. So we're going to put it all up on the screen. So it goes from hope to faith to perspective to resistance to endurance. And if you read the book of Hebrews, you will see these things. But this is what it looks like. When we put our hope in Jesus, that's when our faith journey begins. And when we develop faith and see those in our lives who have had faith, and we understand how Jesus has been faithful, it gives us a healthy perspective. And as we live in the perspective that God will keep his promises, as he did with Jesus, the greatest promise of all time, We grow resistance and thicker spiritual skin. And if we have resistance and thicker spiritual skin, it will build our endurance so that we can live in step with God every single day. This is the progression of what it means to become more like Jesus. It's not something that you show up and you're gonna be like, hey, today I checked off hope, faith, and perspective. I'm set, right? It's constantly refining it and coming back to it and being reminded and growing so that every day we can wake up with endurance. And I think a good marker of if we're living in endurance is if we wake up excited about what God's doing in the world today. If you wake up and you're constantly inundated and focused on the ways that it feels like evil is winning in the world, we are not living in a spirit of endurance. And I think that's been pretty difficult for me. I think this has been a pretty good gut check for me, to be honest, because it's easy to fall into the ways of thinking like the world does, of not thinking in a life of endurance, of God is gonna keep his promises, so it doesn't matter what happens in the world because God has won. He has won and is going to win. That's what it looks like to live a life of endurance. And it's a really good litmus test for us to realize, hey, maybe we need to take a step back and we need to realign our perspective with God. We need to build our resistance to sin and temptation to take things into our own hands and trust that God is already working in the world. And we need to run with endurance the race that is set before us. So why does this matter? At the end of all this section, the author says this. He goes, then you won't grow weary and give up. And man, I can think about of people in my life that I know have given up in their faith because they weren't willing to go through this. One of my best friends, his parents got divorced, and when he was in high school, and that was like earth-shattering, right? And it was really, really difficult for him to reconcile. But I prayed that they would stay together. I prayed that they would lean towards God, and they didn't. So what do I do with that? And his faith journey has been really difficult because of the actions of other people. And it's been able to become an obstacle and a barrier to him experiencing the life that God has for him. I think he's taken significant steps forward. I think he's in a healthy space now, but it just hasn't always been that way. And I can look at my own life, the things that have shown up in my life and how I've allowed other people to affect my walk with God, and has shifted my perspective. It's shifted my ability to have hope and faith and endurance, and it makes you want to bow out. And that is where it says, so you won't grow weary and give up. There's another verse in the Bible that says, like, do not be overcome, for I have overtaken the world. God has already done the thing through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. He's already given us new hope, and so we should not grow weary and give up. So this author, he's saying, fix your eyes like Abraham, who trusted God and that God would take care of him. Fix your eyes like Moses, who answered the call not only to leave Egypt, but to go back and lead these people out of Egypt when he wasn't equipped. Fix your eyes like Rahab, who even had a sinful past, knew that God wanted to use broken people. All of these people knew that they didn't measure up, and they did it anyway. And maybe for you today, the encouragement is that maybe you think you don't measure up, but God is working in your life anyway. God will continue to use you and wants to use you. We need to fix our eyes in Jesus because people will see our faith. It'll help build their perspective. It'll give them resistance, and they can run with endurance. Live a life of testimony where your kids, your one-lifes, your neighbors, regardless of the trials you go through, they will see how you lived your life in step with Jesus, and it will cause them to learn more and lean in. Jesus is greater than our pain, our suffering, our weariness. Jesus is greater than our temptation, our addiction, our sin. Jesus is greater than our career goals or our net worth or our retirement plans. Jesus is greater than our doubts and our struggles. He's greater than our anxieties and depression. Jesus is greater than all of the things that we might fix our eyes on. Jesus is greater. As we wrap up this series, the greatest of all time, there's so many things in life that you can put your attention and devotion to that is not better. And constantly we have these realizations in these moments where we lean back and we say, oh yeah, Jesus is better. And we do that for a while, and then we look for something else. As we leave here today, and as you have conversations in your small group and the people around you this week, let's commit to fixing our eyes on Jesus, the greatest of all time, and the author and the perfecter of our faith. If you're new to the faith and you feel like you're maybe at the very beginning of trying to figure out what it looks like for hope and faith, we'd love to have a conversation with you. This next hour, we're having some people get baptized. Maybe for you today, that your step is to say yes, and I'm going to draw a line in the sand, and I'm going to get baptized. I'm going to begin my faith journey. I know where I need to anchor my hope in, and I'm going to begin my faith journey today. If you feel like you're somewhere else along that spectrum and you want someone to talk to, you can go to the Welcome Center. It's just out the doors and to the right. And someone will be there to have conversations with you about what it looks like to take a step forward in your faith today. Let's pray. God, you are good. God, I pray that you would speak directly to us today. I pray that you would give us what we need. I pray that you would hope, that you would give us grace and mercy. God, we need grace and mercy from you, and I pray that that would reveal to us the truth of who you are and what you've done. God, you're good all the time. It's in your name we pray. Amen.